Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining us today, the 9th ArchiTalk. Today we are privileged to have Peter Damen. Sorry, I just apologize for my voice. I've lost my voice, so hope you don't mind. Peter Damen is the Chief Executive Officer of Level 5 Design, the Chairman of Innovate Australia, and the architect and past Chairman of the nation's peak body for autonomous vehicles, the Australia and New Zealand Driverless Vehicle Initiative, ADVI. Prior to establishing Level 5 Design, Peter was the Chief Creating Officer of Australia's National Road and Transport Research Agency. In his role at Level 5 Design, Peter works closely with leading autonomous vehicles technology companies to operationalise their technology into Australian applications. Peter is considered a national and international expert in emerging transport technologies, automated vehicles, parking and traffic management, road safety and future transport planning. He is a qualified civil engineer with over 25 years' experience in the industry. He has been involved in some of Australia's largest transport infrastructure projects, and he has an industry network that extends across the globe. Peter believes that innovation is the key to Australia's future in making better investment decisions and accomplishing more for the community. I'm actually very glad that Peter is available, because every time you reach him, he's somewhere in some different continents of the world. So we're really privileged to have him. Thank you, Peter.
That's all right. Is there a clicker or something?
No, sorry, unfortunately. Do you want me to do that for you?
No, I can do it. Is it?
We don't have that remote control. Yes, sure.
Oops. It's about as close as it goes, isn't it?
Let me just check. I think that's about.
That's all right.
Yeah.
So I'll have to stand over here to operate the slides, so I hope you don't mind. So I've been asked to talk a little about transport technology and what it means for the future of our city. So I'm going to do my best today. Thank you for coming out. I believe I've got about 40 minutes to run you through some of the insights I can give, and then we'll have some questions. Okay? But feel free to interrupt me at any time. Who here in the audience likes the idea of driverless vehicles? Yeah, about half. Oh, yeah, no, get a few more. Who wants to own one? Anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. That should make it easy. You've got pretty much a converted crowd already. Okay? One or two of you are sitting on the fence. All right. So, what's different about that vehicle?
No wheels.
No what?
I can't see a steering wheel.
No steering wheel, no. What else? No pedals, yeah? So, this is an existing production vehicle right now, not available for you and I, of course, but produced by General Motors. Now, the design of the inside of the vehicle is pretty much the same as a current vehicle, with the exception it doesn't have a steering wheel or pedals, and it's got a pretty smart brain in it. It's got very sophisticated driverless vehicle brain with advanced algorithms and artificial intelligence, but on the outside it looks like any other car would have on our streets today. This is a General Motors cruise automation CV Bolt, which is a small electric vehicle that you can buy on the showroom floors in the US right now. Of course, the ones that you buy in the showrooms in the US have a steering wheel and pedals, but this is how they're transforming. This is what we're going to most likely see first, this sort of transformation with the technology where people can still, in this case, mum and dad will still want a steering wheel and pedals, so you can still choose to drive it in manual mode when you'd like to, but you can also flick it over to automated mode. But for fleets, like the Ubers, the Olas, the DiDis, taxis, they'll be implementing these, and that's where the first of these vehicles will be deployed. And that's what General Motors is looking to do. In Australia, we'll see, it'll be a long time before we get these, but in places like the US, they'll get them before us, and China. Okay. Oh, a bit of Star Wars music. There you go. Go back to them. No, that's all I wanted to do. Okay, so I'll tell you a bit about my journey because it influences what we're going to talk about today. So, in my role, I was responsible for watching what was happening around the globe and seeing what was going to come to Australia in the transport space, which might colloquially bite us. You know, basically catch us unawares, so we're not prepared. So one of the things which is coming out of the global environments, what with other governments, was that they were much more prepared with autonomous vehicles than we were. And we could see that they were taking advantage of this already, and we need to catch up. So we identified the need to actually take this technology and do something with it in Australia. And over the last few years, I have to say, since we started this journey, we've caught up pretty well. But there was a bit of research that came out of the US, which I thought was quite compelling at the time. This was about 6 or 7 years ago, where the University of Michigan did a public opinion survey around the globe. Countries like Australia, the UK, the US, China and other places, identified what people's appetite for the technology was and what it meant for them. And what was really interesting for me at the time, and what's really got us going on this journey, was that Australians were the least likely to know about this technology of anyone in the world, out of all those countries that they surveyed. We knew very little about it. However, we were most willing to adopt the technology, even though we knew nothing about it, and we were most willing to pay more for it than anyone else. So we're a nation of early adopters when it comes to technology. Everyone's got to have the latest smartphone and so forth. And so that meant there was a great opportunity for Australia to really adopt this technology and take advantage of it, because there's a whole range of benefits I'll talk about in a second. So today I'm going to run through a few themes. I'm not going to talk too much about the technology. I can't get away from it because it's part of it, but you can go on YouTube, you can go Google. There's a heap of information about this out there. Okay, but what I want to run through is a bit more about what this means for our cities. Okay, so when I talk about this technology, I talk about a rapid evolution rather than a revolution. What was taking 20 years in terms of technology to develop from concept through to deployment or implementation is now only taking a handful of years, less than 5. In some cases, technology I'm aware of, they conceived of 2 years ago and now they're already putting it to market. So things are rapidly accelerating, but it's still a situation where we're not going to get this light bulb moment where we go human-driven, 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 and then everyone goes to bed one night, and the next morning they get up and everyone's driving a robotic vehicle. It's not going to be like that, yeah? It's going to still be a staged transition. And so we're going to have much more of this situation where we're going to get an integration through this transition period of the technology. So people will be working alongside the technology for a long time. In many cases, you might have an autonomous vehicle. You might decide to manually drive it for part of the day, put it in a conditional automation mode another part of the day, and highly automated yet another part of the day. So ultimately, the vehicles don't come stock standard. They can be used in different forms and formats. Okay, and why are we doing this is because the benefits are substantial. The immediate one is road safety, a reduction in road safety trauma. So we know that whilst the types of crashes may change, not all the crashes on our roads are going to be eliminated, what we will see is a reduction in the number of the crashes. We know already with many of the advanced driver assistance technologies we've got in our current fleet, like the newest cars with things like adaptive cruise control, stop-start control, lane keeping and so forth, we're already seeing a major improvement in road safety outcomes. But with these vehicles, we get a major benefit in road safety. The exact number is unknown, but certainly all the research at the moment suggests over 50% reduction in crashes. But also a major improvement in terms of accessibility and mobility for particularly those people that are more disadvantaged in our communities, like the elderly, those with mobility impairments, might be in a wheelchair, the young and so forth, that don't have access to the same mobility options as the rest of the community. They now have new opportunities in front of them. Also a range of productivity benefits, both for industry and the nation. And I won't go through it more on that, but there's certainly a whole range of reasons for doing it. There are some disadvantages as well, and we need to manage those through regulation. And that's why when I started this journey with ADVI and so forth, in my previous role, basically the first thing we have to do is to get the government, well, first thing I have to do is get public awareness up. So when we did, I was quite privileged to be the architect of the first ever autonomous vehicle demonstration in Australia. In fact, in the Southern Hemisphere, when we partnered with Volvo back in 2016 to deliver the autonomous vehicle demonstrations on the Southern Expressway in Adelaide. And that reached 13 million Australians in terms of the media outreach, and that was really the purpose of that, to start getting public awareness up. Get ministers. We had every minister from every state of Australia in those vehicles getting to appreciate what it was all about, so they started thinking about it and therefore regulating for it so that we don't actually hold up the process. But in any case, I'm talking a lot about driverless vehicles today, or what you might interchangeably call autonomous or automated vehicles. But we're actually talking about a whole range of different technologies at the moment which are actually complementary. So we get the best outcome when we have shared transport with autonomous, connected, electric services. So what we talk about is, I talk about shared ACEs or ACEs, which is this convergence of these different technologies. We're seeing a major growth in the shared economy, and coupled with these other technologies, and car ownership levels are going down, licensing levels are dropping as well, because people want to have a different relationship with their vehicles than they do right now. And what we're seeing is a convergence of this, all with new mobility business models and new revenue sources, because at the moment the federal government gets a lot of their money from fuel excise. That's going to disappear, of course, when we don't have combustion engines. We've got electric vehicles, so we're going to have to pay for our road infrastructure in a different way. So consequently, a lot of the companies are looking at new business models. You subscribe to a car rather than act like you do with Netflix, rather than own a car. New car sharing and ride sharing models, which I think are really great, both for environmental sustainability but also for collective implementation of this technology overall. At the moment, cars are really bad sustainable things, if we can call them that. They're parked at 95% of the time. They're hardly ever used. Really bad investment decision to own a car. I've got to be careful because I own one, but ultimately you'd be much better off sharing one or entering some sort of a different relationship in relation to your car, at least for your second car if you've got two. Okay, so this is me. When are they coming? I think I might show this the last time I was here. This is the Beidou Apollo Level 4 autonomous vehicle. This means that the car actually drives itself. You don't have to have any interaction with the vehicle. It does everything. And this is in China. Beidou, of course, for those that don't know, is the equivalent of Google in China, and they're heavily invested in this space. We took a delegation, government delegation over to China to really explore what they're doing, because they don't talk that much about what they're doing, and they're really very advanced. And so the technology is coming, but I have to say there's a lot of hype in this space, and for the normal punters, people like you and I, like you guys in the audience that are just listening to what's in the media, what's true, what's not true, it's a bit hard to really know. So back in 2014, it's only 5 years ago, this is what all the manufacturers are saying. Tesla would have already had their fleet out about 3 years ago on the streets. Volvo were about a year behind. It didn't happen. They were hyping it a fair bit. That's because it's harder than what they actually thought to do this, particularly with passenger vehicles, and that's why I'll dovetail down into some of the use cases that we'll see first, which aren't passenger vehicles. But right now, this is the dates the manufacturers are publishing. GM's at this stage talking about being first to market. They were supposed to bring that Chevy Bolt you had out to fleets in 2019 in the US. It didn't happen because they're being concerned about some safety issues. But certainly some initial deployments in fleet operations very soon. Even if these dates don't happen, and it's a couple of years later, it's still very much in the near term, short to medium. So we still need to be thinking in terms of our planning and for our cities about how we actually manage this. Our city infrastructure has a life cycle of at least 100 years. What we do now will be there for 100 years. We need to think right now about what we do to prepare for this. So I say the last 5% is the tough bit. When it comes to passenger vehicles, public environments or public roads are really hard. The first 95% we've solved. These vehicles can run just about anywhere. I'll run a video while I'm talking. I use this video because this is 3 or 4 years old now. This is a Nissan video. It shows you just how good the technology was even 3 or 4 years ago. This vehicle here is operating in a quite complicated or complex urban environment, and the driver there, the safety driver, never intervenes at any point in time in the journey. So, but you know, if they were driving through the middle of a blizzard in Sweden or a sandstorm in the Gobi Desert, it probably wouldn't cope. So they need to solve those unusual scenarios that all of us as humans can deal with potentially, that the car yet hasn't been programmed for. So you can see there that it's quite sophisticated technology. I might just skip on. So we're not going to see passenger. Don't read the whole slide. I'm not going to go right through it. But the passenger vehicles aren't the first things we're going to see, right? So in fleets, companies like ADVI and Uber are very keen to get that to market because it means they can take the driver out of the vehicle, which is a large part of their cost of operation. But for us, we're seeing the technology implemented really in much more controlled environments to begin with. Simpler tasks. And we've seen this already for some time here in Western Australia. Mining is a good example where the technology has been deployed for more than 10 years. In many of our mine sites, they're very controlled. And that's the highlighted area I've got here in the middle. So, mining, agriculture, defence, they're really advanced in the defence sector. In fact, 75% now of the US Air Force planes or whatever they are drones now. So there's hardly any manned aircraft in the US Air Force anymore. And of course ports. Other controlled environments are the first places we'll see the technology deployed. We're already seeing it right now. Very little human interaction in those spaces, very easy to control, much simpler use cases. So, but that also affects how we think about the planning and structure of our towns and cities. If we come back to some of these others, I'm going to just tick through the ones that I highlighted fairly quickly. So the one that's really a big opportunity for Western Australia right now is long-haul automation. We've got the technology right now that can do this. So this is basically, if you want to take a large freight consignment from, say, Perth to Kununurra, the truck can actually do that now without a driver in the cabin. So basically what we're talking about here is they can drive from depot to depot without any human interaction. I've got a video just quickly which I might I don't know if this is playing. I don't know. All right. I think it's working. Fine. Oh yes, that's fine. I have a tendency to walk around. Now you can see this is the Too Simple technology, which is a Chinese company, which are actually looking to set up in Australia right now. I'm working alongside, but this particular truck travels, it's sped up, all right? So it's like not the real speed, okay? So just made it a bit quicker so you can see what they're doing. But this vehicle runs from depot to depot, so through urban areas and on long-haul environments, so along highways and freeways without any human interaction. It'll travel hundreds of kilometres without once having any human interaction. So you can see it can deal with things like you saw at the beginning, level crossings, railway level crossings and all sorts of stuff. So, and it does that through a very complex sensor array, a whole bunch of stuff, like that vehicle we saw at the beginning. That had 5 LiDARs, which is the laser scanning detection devices, 13 cameras, 23 radars. You can see better than you or I. You can see in the dark. You can see if it's connected around corners. It can do all sorts of things that we can't do. So quite sophisticated, but still can have challenges. So that's a bit about the technology. Oh, and we've got to, and of course, when it comes to our building design, start thinking about Service deliveries are going to change quite dramatically, both the form of the vehicles that are servicing vehicles and how they service vehicles. This is the Neuro vehicle. You can see the size of it there, which is quite small. And this is most of our deliveries these days, and it's growing rapidly with Amazon and all those sorts of new ways, eBay and what we're dealing with. But you know, it's pizza delivery, it's flowers, it's all sorts of small parcels, and we don't need the big trucks for that. We need that for pools, we need it for beds and stuff, and we'll still have a little bit of that, but we'll see an expansion, a massive growth in these smaller vehicles. Now this is what we call a drone. It's a land-based drone rather than an air drone, but it basically is a simpler use case, because if it is presented with a challenge, like it's going to have to run over someone, it can just self-destruct or do whatever it needs to do. You know, it can operate in a different format than if it had a human in it. And the one that I really like talking about at the moment is self-parking, because this really changes our relationship with buildings. At the moment, we spend all of our time, you know, parking these cars in these dirty, dingy places. I'll talk a little bit more about it now. This is the Mercedes Automated Valet Park. And what we have at the moment is these seas of parkings near our shopping centres and our big buildings. Yeah, really ugly. But apart from that, look at the development potential we've wasted. You know, what better things could we do with that space? Could we turn it into a park? Could we turn it into community space? Could we turn it into more office space, for that matter, and have high density activity there? So what we want to think about is how we can change that relationship, and not only for our commercial centres but also for our residential centres. As we no longer need to have the vehicle parking at our house here in our garage with our driveway, we can do different things. Okay, and so we're sort of going back to the future. We're back 100 years ago, before we had cars, where we had off-street arrangements. We had no off-street parking. Everything was done through drop-off and pick-off with your horse and cart out the front of your building. So look to the past for the future. Interesting. Okay, so this is a sort of experience we have with our car parks right now. They're dark, dirty, dingy. Who likes that? Anyone? No. Why do you even need to go into these places? They're just for storing cars. So if we can actually stop having to go into that space, we can have a completely different experience with our buildings. So, you know, this is not the greatest example, but it's hard to get good images these days. But these cars, of course, are zero emission, so they're not popping out toxic fumes, so you can take them places you might not want to have done before. But if you imagine this is the foyer of, I don't know, Central Park in the city or something, people just get dropped at the front door like they would for rideshare or car share, have a whole different experience with the front of your building. The vehicles then go away and park themselves. They go down the 100 metres, 200 metres to the car parking area, and they park themselves. You never actually have to go into that zone. As a consequently, we can change the whole design of our car parks quite dramatically, which I'll touch on, I think. So now we start talking about central car parking zones, so you don't have car parking dedicated to particular uses. You know, we make better use of the car parking. We don't have to have the same sorts of features. Within this, we can build in things like electric charging within the car parking areas, and you know, pick up and drop off, car on demand sort of services. And what we do know is that we can provide 60% less space in our car parks if they're dedicated for self-parking. We don't need to open the doors on the car, we don't need the same aisle space, we don't need the walkways, we don't need the boom gates, we don't need the crossings, we don't need the ventilation because there's nobody in there, we don't need the lighting. It becomes incredibly more cost effective than what it is right now. Obviously this is a extreme example, but ultimately you can do things differently. And people don't want to be in those spaces anyway. And the car parks that we've got, we'll still need a lot of off-street car parking, but we won't need as much car parking. So we need to think about what we can do to repurpose, from an architectural sense, those car parks into other uses. And so that's what we're talking at the moment about, getting the right floor heights, not just for car parking, but so it can be turned into an art gallery, it can be turned into office space, restaurant space, whatever later on. You know, because we've got And many of our Australian cities, and Perth is a good example, got acres and acres and hectares, I should say, hectares and hectares of car parking space which we could be repurposing for other things. And many of our central buildings in the CBD here have floors of car parking that we won't need anymore. Might have some car parking for things like car sharing, but ultimately we don't need what we've got right now. This is quite a busy slide, so don't take it all in. But I think the thing I want to point out here is that I talked a bit before about the convergence of these technologies, and we get more and more societal benefits the further we come across the screen here to a shared electric autonomous economy. And what we see is that while this requires a fair bit of investment and a major transformation of how our cities operate, the cost of travel comes down to about less than a third of what it is now. This changes people's decision making, where they might live, where they might work, how they might actually travel around their cities. Transport is such a major driver of how our cities operate. And so the cost here, 31% of the current cost today is the prediction of this one study. Also, need 60% less parking space, not because we need less space in the parking area itself, which I talked about before, but because there's a demand of 60% less for parking, because the vehicles are being used more, they're not sitting around for 95% of the day. So that compounded with what we talked about before, you can see how the demand for parking drops down to like 40% of where it was before in terms of space. So we need to start thinking about this now, because you build a building today in the city, it's going to be there for another 50, 100 years. Once the car parking's in there, unless we can repurpose that space. But this changes people's decision making, and really it should do for things like car sharing. We're really been a long way behind the rest of the world. Perth is really, really sad. I mean, Curtin University is actually the exemplar in Western Australia, believe it or not. And I don't know what you've got to say about that. But this campus has got more car sharing opportunity than any other site in the whole of Perth. There's about 6 or 9 car sharing bays in this campus, which is still pretty sad. But the whole of Perth, there's only about 12 or 15 car sharing bays available in the whole city. We're so far behind other cities in Australia and so far behind the rest of the world in taking up this technology. Rideshare's taken off really, really well, and now it's surpassed taxi in Perth. I think there's more people using Uber and Ola than taxis now. But the real benefit of this is sustainability and cost. So one car used by between 5 and 15 people, 5 times more, between 5 and 15 times more than a normal car. So we've got between 5 and 15 less cars than what we have now. So the environmental benefits of that are substantial. But also, when we're building this building, these days we see the cost of a car park being to construct about $100,000, between $50,000 and $100,000 for a multi-storey car park. Take out 10 to 15 bays, you've just saved $1 million on your construction costs for your building, just with one of these. You put 10 of them in, $500,000 to, $5 million to $10 million, I should say, dollars saved on your construction costs. Think what you could do with that in your building design and so forth that you're not doing right now. Of course, these got to be properly activated. If the cars are just sitting around, no one's using them, it's a waste of time. And so that's a big part of the issue at the moment. But transport costs also affect our decisions about where we live, work and so forth. And here's a picture which shows a radius 25 kilometres out from the CBD. And what we know from a lot of the work that's being done at the moment is, depending on how things are regulated, people will change their decisions. Cheaper to live out here, they've got different choices out here. Now, they're no longer having to supervise the driving tasks as they come to work. They can use that time for other things. They can be working in the car. They can be doing all sorts of things in the car. They can live further out. If I was a developer, I'd be starting to think about what's happening out in these outer zones, because it becomes a lot more attractive as the cost of travel reduces. And we can do other things with our time. So, I don't know how I'm going. Am I going all right for time?
Maybe 5 more minutes.
Okay, I might just skip through. I had a little scenario here with where I was going to take you on a journey. Maybe I can do that quickly, but I was going to show you Jennifer. Jennifer's advertising and marketing executive in Perth. She happens to live in this place now. Who knows where that is? Where? That's Lancelin. Yes? Anyone been to Lancelin? Quite nice. It's about 90 minutes from Perth. But she can do that because she now uses an autonomous vehicle. She actually, her family bought that house on the beach 20 years ago. Pretty nice, huh? But things have changed a lot. It's now 2035, 2040, and Lancelin's developed quite a lot over that period because everyone can travel much further and use that time differently. Many people have still got garages and driveways, but others, like Jennifer, she's put a pool in there, and what we've got is these consolidated autonomous vehicle stations where the cars go park themselves rather than having a garage, and you just call it up when you want it and it comes to pick you up. So there's an example of how Lancelin might develop, for instance. Now, obviously, over time, that'll transform even further. On the way to work, she can do all sorts of different things. In this case, she's reading about autonomous vehicles, but she could be working, she could be making phone calls, she could be doing a whole bunch of different things. And if she had a Jaguar, she might not even be looking forward. She could be watching the surround sound TV and, you know, I don't know, watching the latest golf match or something. So the options are quite extensive. When she gets into work, and she might only go to work for a couple of days a week, so, you know, the form and function of our cities changes too. She can drop off her vehicle at the front door. You might even have a much better experience than these. I'm just using the videos that are available. Vehicle goes and parks itself, and obviously she'll have a smarter phone than she has today, but she can, she's connected to it. She never has to enter the car park. She heads straight up into the building and gets to work and interacts with her colleagues. And if we just give it a little bit of time to catch up with me, obviously you can keep track of the vehicle, you can call it up when you want to. I think it fast forwards this video through a few hours, and towards the end of the day, when you want to pick it up, you just dial it up, say when you want it to pick you up, and away you go. Now, what we need is a lot more drop-off and pick-up space outside our buildings to accommodate this, because ultimately, you know, the cars or you are going to be waiting outside the building more than what you are now. You can see she's finishing up her meetings, wakes her way down in the elevator, and the vehicle hopefully should be waiting for her. And here it comes, and off she goes and she gets into it. So this is a near-term solution. This is not, when we're talking longer term, it's going to be much more sophisticated than this, but ultimately that's where we're at. And then, oops, when she gets home, she's transformed, car's changed, and again, she can just get out of her car, send it off to go park itself. Right? So easy as that. I won't play the whole video. So the opportunity presents itself to do things differently. So when we're talking about some of the issues around sustainability, we need to be careful about things in this case like empty vehicle running. So in that case where Jennifer comes into work, she might decide she doesn't want to pay for the parking, she sends the car home, you know, 100 kilometres to go park itself. We don't want that sort of thing happening because we actually and have all these empty cars running around that are adding to congestion. So there's going to have to be a fair bit more work done around that. Obviously, some benefits in terms of these vehicles. The newer ones will be zero emission. That helps our environment. We can use cheaper forms of energy. We're seeing this being also sustainable in terms of where people work. They need to travel less because the options are different to them over time. We're seeing this already happening. And ultimately giving more space to people rather than vehicles. So I'll talk a bit more about this in the last few minutes. So prioritising space for people, giving space back to our communities. So here's an example. I have to acknowledge the Department of Infrastructure in Victoria. For example, how our local street might transform. And this is a typical sort of example of one of our older neighbourhoods like Subiaco, where there's no off-street parking, which isn't needed anymore with autonomous vehicles, and we've got parking on street. But as things change in this new paradigm, we can start thinking about how we might transform that same street so that we actually give the space back to the people. And we can do that because we've got less cars parking on street. They're parking in centralised zones. We've got drop-off and pick-off, but ultimately we don't have as many vehicles, and they're operating under safer environments, but are more consistent with pedestrian environment. So just some final points about our evolving cities and streetscape. Our cities will transform over time. They have over the last 100 years. If you go back 100 years and look at how our cities were, Perth was a very different place. They will continue to do that. And consequently, our urban form and function will need to change, but commercial areas will be the first to change because they're the ones where there's a business imperative and where the technology is first to market. Space wasted by vehicles can be used for better things, and I'm actively encouraging this with a focus on people in our streetscapes rather than vehicles. The results uncertain, but we're a lot of the gamblers on this at the moment are saying they're expecting a simultaneous densification of our CBDs and as well as some urban sprawl. It's the middle suburbs which we're not quite sure what they'll mean for them at the moment. So, but the opportunities are substantial. What we don't want is this sort of thing, as I said, is the open running where transport's so cheap that you can just sleep in your car, you don't need a house anymore. I don't think we'll let that happen, but there's lots of different people conjecturing what might be. But in terms of our streets, and I spent a lot of time about in my work around planning for local streets, there's a real opportunity now to start changing the way we think about that and designing them very differently. So narrower streets, reprioritising the space for high priority uses, so reducing parking, allocating space for car drop-off and pick-up for public transport. Public transport itself will change. There's a change already happening with much more on-demand applications. People want convenience, they want access, which they don't get through the current public transport opportunities. That's why we're seeing a major increase in rideshare as well. And a lot more around safer crossings for pedestrians with the narrower streets, and also allocating curb space to other uses, so experience activities for pedestrians rather than for cars. In our suburbs and our subdivisions, we're sort of, as I said before, back to the future. I'm not sure we're going straight back to terrace houses, but we don't need the off-street parking, we don't need the garages, we don't need the driveways. We can give the streets back to our people, have a much different way about looking at that urban form. And to do that, we really need to start working on our land use policy right now, and to make sure that that's actually fit for purpose for the next couple of decades. And in terms of our freight and delivery opportunities, again, I'll just reiterate that our building designs need to change for service delivery. We're going to have a lot more of these smaller vehicles than the larger ones we've got right now. That means different designs for those buildings. Also growth in off-peak delivery and long-haul automation, which will change how we go about the design of our industrial areas and so forth. Ultimately, it's going to take a long time to get there, but I expect rapid changes over the next few years, and you guys in your space will be part of the vehicle for getting us there. So I hope you're on the journey with me. Thanks for your time. I've got time for questions if we've got time. Yeah. Up the back, yeah. Refuel? Well, they're mostly electric for a start, so because it makes sense for them to be electric. They can do drive-by-wire. And electric vehicles, there's a number of ways of recharging. I mean, if they park themselves, they can park over a charging station, so an inductive charging pad. Or these days, there's battery replacement. In China, they can change over a battery in them in 3 minutes. It just pulls into a service dock and the battery is underneath and it just gets replaced. There's a number of ways, yeah. Other questions here? Yeah?
Is there much sort of protection against hackability and things?
Yeah, a lot of work being done on cybersecurity at the moment. Obviously, places like the US, the last thing they want is someone packing these full of explosives and running them to an embassy, right? So they're putting about as much effort into cybersecurity as the actual autonomous systems. And what I've seen is that the systems are quite separate, so you can't sort of hack one and get into the other. So quite a fair few levels of redundancy in that. But the vehicles we've got now, you see stories about them being hacked, Jeeps being hacked and this being hacked. It's just because they weren't designed not to be hacked. As soon as they put the effort into trying to prevent that, certainly they'll get there. Nothing's 100% perfect, but of course, so we'll just have to see how that goes. Another question over here, yeah?
The automation of these different disciplines, farming,
Yep.
military, truck drivers, you're talking about the elimination of a lot of different disciplines in work. So if a lot of people lose their jobs to these automations, there's not that much money going back into the economy, but you expect that the economy or the government will be the ones funding these changes in infrastructure. Is this something you considered?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think job sustainability is really important. There's been a fair bit of work done on it, particularly around the work's shown that there won't ultimately be a loss of jobs, but there'll be a assignment of jobs. There'll be maybe some issues with equity. If I give you the example of automated trucking, at the moment we're short of truck drivers. We can't get them. The average age of a truck driver in Western Australia is 54 years old. 89% of them are male. And most of them don't want to be doing that job anymore because it's tiresome, impact on the family, all these sorts of things. So we're having to import or get immigration to help us with truck drivers right now. And the freight task is growing rapidly. The projection is because of all the Amazons and whatnot, the on-road freight is growing rapidly. So what we see is this automation will actually supplement the existing drivers over time, and as they're re-skilled, they'll get into other things like distributing, warehousing and so forth as new jobs arrive. It's no different than when we saw the introduction of computers in the 80s. Everybody thought the world was going to end, but of course we had a whole new industry now called the IT industry, which we never had before, and there's more jobs than there was ever before. So yes, there are issues, and I think there's more of an issue of equity. So the people that are less educated, that have low-level jobs, when I say low-skilled jobs, I mean, are more likely to be impacted than those that are actually well-educated. Yeah. And that's the issue. That's why the education is so important and why the government needs to put more effort into that as we move forward so that we have a future for those people. Yep, absolutely. Another question here, yeah?
Has any research been done to the feasibility of converting existing cars?
Yeah. Yeah, there has been. At the moment, regulators haven't been real keen on it because it's not something you can easily retrofit with it. There's safety issues often with it. But yeah, there's been a few companies, startups that have come out with options and everybody wanted to buy into them, but then they've been closed down by the government. But ultimately we will see that it's more likely to be able to be applied to electric vehicles than combustion engine vehicles. But Australia's really got to get going with electric vehicles. I mean, it's really sad. I mean, we're starting to pick up, but I was in China recently. They're registering 300,000 electric vehicles every year now, and we did 300 last year. So.
But it's the affordability, isn't it? That's the problem. People would take up electric vehicles if they didn't cost as much as they.
Well, in the next 5 years, the cost is going to rapidly come down because we don't actually manufacture cars anymore. And so we're technology takers. So as that vehicles come in from places like China, a lot of the companies like Volvo are owned by the Chinese anyway. So when those cars come to Australia, they'll become more affordable as we get more of them. It's a matter of scale, I think. But we need the charging infrastructure as well. And Western Australia is really sad in that respect as well. Eastern states is much better. It takes a lot longer to charge a vehicle at the charging stations over here than it does over east. Anyway, I'm on my other little hobby horse. So, you have another question?
Yeah, you can say about the Grand Trade War and the differences it might create between American and Chinese operations.
Not in this space, I wouldn't think. No. In fact, it's interesting because if you look at the moment, the US is the best place in the world to do testing for autonomous vehicles. They make it easiest. It's easier to do testing in America than it is in China. One third of the companies testing in the US are Chinese companies. So the Americans are making it very easy for them. But look, the Americans and Chinese have got very similar models at the moment, which is very different to the Europeans, where The Americans are sort of, let's break the regulations, we're just going to go hard and get the stuff to market, and we're not worried. Like the Europeans are a lot more conservative than the Japanese, so that's why we see a lot of hype coming out of America. The Chinese are a bit more conservative, but I don't think the trade war is going to impact that. The Chinese are well and truly inveigled in US operation when it comes to autonomous vehicles. Yeah. Yep.
Autonomous vehicles that manufacturers are coming through these early years of the next decade, how do you think they'll manage in mixed traffic where you have pedestrians and cyclists? And I ask that because one of the dystopian scenarios out there is segregated roads where we almost go back.
Yeah, we don't want that. We don't want that, and all governments, I think, at this stage agree we don't want segregated environments. And we don't want space for vehicles, we ultimately want space for people, yeah? But as I said before, that use case, which is, passenger vehicles operating on public roads, is probably the longer one off. It's further in the future because it's the harder one to manage. So that's why we're seeing these applications in commercial environments and in more controlled spaces first. When it comes to running an automated truck on the Great Northern Highway, it's not going to encounter many pedestrians crossing the Great Northern Highway, right? So it's an easier environment. That's what we'll see first. But when we are talking about 2030, 2040, when we're starting to see the technology come to bear, first it'll be applied in fleets. So they'll be highly mapped. The sensors are very good. I don't know if you saw from that Nissan video, which is already a few years old, pedestrian walked out in front of it, spot on, it stopped. In the Beidou vehicle I was in earlier this year, that drove itself. It was a level 4, so it means it's highly automated. It operated in a completely uncontrolled environment, so pedestrians, it was a university campus in fact, and a guy stepped out right in front of the car, he was on his phone, wasn't even looking where he was walking, walked straight in front of the car, and the car just dealt with it perfectly. And then it just slowed down and then manoeuvred around, and he looked up and he thought, oh. Yeah. So I personally think that the technology's clever enough to deal with that sort of situation. To say it's the ones, I've even seen ones where there's a drunken hooligan that are running around and playing antics in front of an autonomous vehicle and it deals with it fine. So I think that's okay. And we are talking about particularly slow speed environments that'll be deployed first, where walking speeds and so forth, 20k environments, 30k environments, there's more time to stop and so forth. But yeah, we're going to continue to have that liability question that people are concerned about the old tram car scenario, about which decision do I make. Ultimately, we've got a fair bit of time, I think, before we get there. Yeah. One more question up the back, and then a couple here, and we might finish. Yeah.
I've seen the new Harley-Davidson DIY, the electric motorcycles.
I haven't seen that one, no. But I'd like to.
Technology is applicable to motorcycles.
Yeah, look, the motorcycle technology is coming along really fast too. I mean, I've got a motorcycle and I love it. And I know in Japan, I was there recently, where they actually devised an autonomous motorcycle, and within a couple of days, it managed to learn to operate at 200 kilometres an hour with nobody in control of it. So they're self-learning. That's the benefit of this technology also for crashes, because once one learns, every vehicle learns about that scenario. Whereas you learn, I don't necessarily learn. But yeah, I mean, electric bikes, it makes sense. I mean, it doesn't require a big electric power source to run a Harley Davidson. Or parking space, yeah, absolutely. So that's why I think the designs of our vehicle will transform over time. The early stages is we'll get vehicles as we have now, as I showed. But even that Jaguar picture I showed sort of intimated that things could change. You don't need to be looking forward anymore. You can be looking backwards. You can be sleeping in the vehicle. You can be doing all sorts of things. And in fact, the value of the data in a vehicle becomes a lot more than the value of the vehicle itself. And that's why companies like Intel, Google and so forth are getting into this space, because they want to sell you downloads. You want you watching movies in your car. They want you downloading all sorts of stuff and interacting with the vehicles in different ways than they ever did in the past. Question here, yeah?
So following up on sort of the social theme, is that it's all very good with all this, but my biggest concern is that sort of education. But are there organisations like yours that are actually engaging with the hard sell of, if we don't make significant changes with social infrastructure that will have ghettos, will have poverty, that if the fuel price, like if fuel, like it's not affordable enough fuel there, that people in outlying suburbs can't afford because to do that, because they're in a socioeconomic position that they have to buy another $500 car, and it's going to be a long time before these vehicles can get to that price as well. And that should that, like, is that conversation actually happening?
Yeah, look, I think it is. I mean, I'm across a lot of it, and it definitely is happening. There's talk around the planning aspects of it, around the societal impacts of it, things like I said before about the empty running, things like use of public transport and what it means for our cities and so forth. But that's happened more recently, I'd have to say. I mean, people got excited by the technology, and what we have is these technology people just talking to each other. You go to one of these conferences, and it's all like-minded people talking to each other. I mean, you get that with every conference probably, but so it's now pushed out. But people like myself are trying to drive that conversation because, you know, things like local governments that are more community orientated need to start thinking about this. It's not just a federal government issue. You know, architects, planners, urban designers need to think about it right now because the documents that we've got. I mean, even things simple like car sharing, which is nothing to do with autonomous vehicles. We should have it here in Perth right now, but most development companies I talk to don't do it because councils don't have a car sharing policy. There's only 2 councils in the whole of Perth that have a car sharing policy. So, you know, they've got to beat their heads against the council to get something like that through. It should be easier. So we need to do that work right now to actually make it simple to get the things right.
Talking about China, is that I wouldn't want Australia to turn into a situation where, even though in the 80s they opened up after a lot of it closed off industrialisation and this massive boom, and then we still have people living in poverty, basically living on subsistence farming in major urban centres because they can't grow anywhere. Sure. And obviously China is a different context, but it would just be a very big concern that in 50 years' time, are we going to be like China in that sense?
I certainly hope not. But we've got to put an Australian lens over this. This has got to be right fit for Australia, and that's why we started this journey for Australia. So we have a conversation with our politicians, with our public, so we make this a right fit for us. And everyone's got a role to play in that. The fact of the matter is we've got to be careful not to sort of slow it down too much, so we've got to run these things in parallel because the benefits are lost otherwise. You know, if you say, oh, it's not going to be safe enough, you know, we're going to wait 10 years, you've just lost another, you know, 10,000 lives on our roads. And so there's a tipping point there where you say we're going to save more people than we're going to lose, and we've got to be serious about how we approach this. It's a lot with a lot of these things. We need to take a very pragmatic view like that. But yeah, I mean, we've got to keep our politicians honest on these sorts of topics. One last question, then one here. Yeah. Oh, there it is. Yeah.
I was just wondering, like,